Good morning, everyone. My name is James Langer. I'm the digital content manager for channel3000.com. We're getting a kind of a little early start this morning. The jury's already getting assembled for day 6 of the Chandler Halderson trial. We saw a ton of physical evidence being presented yesterday in day 5 of the case. Lots of actual items in the courtroom actually being shown to the jury, that kind of thing. We also heard a lot about what was going on in the Halderson home when they investigated that and kind of tore it apart and found a ton of physical evidence there. We'll see what happens today. The jury's already seated, so I will take you there live to the courtroom now. Here we are for day 6 of the Chandler Halderson trial.
Inadvertently or intentionally or sought any information regarding the case. I see no hands. Thank you very much. We're set to begin. The state can call its next witness, please.
The state calls Stephen Greiber to the stand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
If you are able to safely and responsibly testify without a mask, that would be our preference, if you could.
All right.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Good morning. Could you please state and spell your name for the record?
Stephen Greiber, Stevengreib, as in boy, ER.
And what do you do for a living, sir?
I'm retired,
What are you retired from?
law enforcement.
In what capacity were you in law enforcement?
I was an investigator or detective for most of my years.
Sure.
I'll say that I was a law enforcement officer.
Sure. In full transparency, at times you and I have worked together in our careers.
Yes,
Where at?
at the Dane County District Attorney's Office.
And how long were you at the district attorney's office?
12 years.
Fair to say, since you retired, unfortunately, we haven't kept in contact or anything, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Where do you live, sir, in relation to Bart and Krista Halderson?
I live directly across the street. If our houses are almost like a mirror image of each other, going out my driveway, across the street, or go into their driveway. So our garages face each other, and the front of our houses face each other.
In the early part to the mid part of July of last year, was there some significant police presence in your neighborhood?
Yes.
And was that for an ongoing period of time?
Yes.
At some point, did you talk to a police officer about something you perhaps noticed or remembered from July 1st of 2021?
Yes, I did.
Just first of all, if you could set the stage, what were you doing that day, July 1st?
Well, July 1st, initially, I had been up I have a garden that's away from my property. It's relatively large, a vegetable garden. So I'd been up there most of the day. And then later in the day, my granddaughter had a softball game. So I had attended that softball game, which was like around 6 o'clock in the evening.
Sure. What happened when you arrived home?
So when I came home, which probably been an hour later, about 7 o'clock-ish, somewhere in there. But I had previously harvested some radishes out of my garden and had them in a 5-gallon pail. So I had taken them out into my front driveway and had cleaned them up, just cutting off the excess leaves and stuff like that. But I had sat in a park bench that I have sitting in my driveway that's sitting between the 2 garage doors because I have a 3-bay garage door or garage.
About what time in the day were you out in your lawn clean or the driveway there cleaning the radishes?
It was probably about 7 o'clock-ish, somewhere around that time.
Okay. And what did you notice around that time that caught your attention?
Well, what caught my attention was while I was there doing that for a period of time, all of a sudden I could detect a strong odor just of burning wood. And so I thought someone maybe had a fireplace or I should say a fire pit or something outside going. They're just burning some firewood. But about 5 minutes or so later, all of a sudden that odor of burning wood became a distinct odor that was more like in the line of what I thought someone was like barbecuing a large pork, like in one of these large barbecue barbecue pits or whatever that can hold a whole pork.
Okay. And how long did that smell persist in your neighborhood?
Well, for the remainder of the time I was outside, it was present, kind of became real strong and kind of like a pungent smell, to the point that I actually walked down my driveway half the distance and kind of looked up and down the street to see if anybody was doing anything like grilling or something else was going on, and I didn't see anything at that point.
Okay. If you had to guess, or if you had to estimate distance-wise from the location you are to the Halderson home, about how far away is it?
About maybe 100 to 130 feet.
And you have that observation that day. You're not here to say exactly what that smell was, right?
Other than it smelled to me like, yeah, it was something burning of a meat or fats or something.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
No, thank you.
May this witness be released and excused.
Amen.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a good remainder of your day.
The state calls Colin Lynch to the stand. You're going to follow that deputy right there.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Good morning. If you believe you can do so safely and responsibly, testifying without a mask would be our preference. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Good morning, sir. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Colin Lynch, COLINLYNCH,
And Mr. Lynch, whereabouts do you live?
7022 Bridgman Road,
And what municipality?
Windsor.
Okay. Did you know someone named Bart Halderson?
Yes.
How did you know Bart Halderson?
Neighbor, and we're both commissioners on Lake District.
Sure. I'm going to have you pull that microphone just a little bit closer to you. I'm sorry. Sometimes it's hard to hear in this room. You say you're both commissioners on a lake district?
Yes, it's a special tax district that acquires funds for the management of the pond that we live on.
Sure. You both back up to the pond?
Yeah, correct.
In relation to Mr. Halderson's house, were you aware of where Bart Halderson lived?
Yes.
Where was your house in relation to his house?
Directly behind him across the pond.
Okay. So if you looked across the pond, you'd see Bart Halderson's house?
You're correct.
Okay. Sir, back in July of 2021, did you have any security cameras at your house?
July 2021, yes.
Okay. What type of security system, or how many cameras did you have at your home?
A total of 13.
Did some of them face the front of your house?
Yes.
And did at least one of them face the rear of your house?
Rearward, yeah.
Okay. And does that camera look toward the pond in some respects?
Yes, the pond is in the images above the ground.
Sure.
So,
What was the purpose of that camera when you installed it? Was it to look at the pond, or was it to look at something else?
I had planned when I installed the cameras. I had planned on putting in a pool, and there's terribly risky, terrifying things, and so one of the many reasons for installing cameras at the pool in the rear was the primary purpose of that.
In the mid part of July of last year, were the police having contact with you about your security cameras, and perhaps them having some footage that they thought was helpful?
Yes.
And did you provide full access to your security system at that time?
Yes.
In fact, at one point they actually took your kind of the DVR from your home, did they not?
That's correct.
Okay. And did you later learn that they were particularly interested in maybe the rear camera of your house facing across the pond toward the Halderson house?
Roughly, yes.
And you fully comply with any testing they wanted to do during that time period?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm going to show you it's been marked in this case as exhibit number 306. Let me just ask you, do you know what that is?
Yes, that's my camera 6, my property.
Okay. And is that kind of a screenshot?
That would be accurate, yes.
I'll move 306 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
So I think you testified the deputies took your DVR system and they pulled footage off of it, but you're saying that 306 is at least a screenshot of what that rear camera maybe would have been looking at around that time.
That's correct.
Okay, I'll just move to publish quickly 306.
Of course.
And you said you were planning to build a pool. Looks like you followed through with that, right?
Amazingly, yes.
Okay. You had no further part in analyzing the video or doing anything like that. That was the sheriff's deputies, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. And did they return your DVR to you eventually?
correct.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
No, thank you.
May this witness be excused and released.
He may.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a good remainder of your day. Thank you.
It sounds like the next witness is just on a different floor, so he's on his way up.
All right,
But
thank
we'll
you.
I'll sit here, I suppose, silently for a minute.
Very good. Actually, it's a good point for me to let the jury know that I have a matter on my calendar at 11:45 that I have to address. Although I can be a little bit late or a little bit early. It depends upon where we are in our process. But I'm hoping that the witness schedule will work out in that regard. Otherwise, I may have to cut things off depending on how late we run. Thank you.
The state calls Scott Kuntz at this time.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Good morning, sir. Good morning. If you are able to safely and responsibly testify without a mask and are comfortable doing so, please do.
I will, thank you.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
Good morning, sir. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Good morning, my name is Scott Kuntz, spelled K-U-N-T-Z.
And what do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a sheriff's deputy with the Dane County Sheriff's Office in Madison.
Any particular area?
Yeah, I work in our support services division. And in the support services division, I have a number of duties assigned to me. I conduct covert surveillance when we are looking for criminal suspects and their activities. I collect video evidence, audio evidence, image evidence. I participate in search warrants, not only of physical locations, but of devices looking for information. And I perform forensic image, audio, and video analysis.
Highlighting specifically forensic image and audio analysis, what specific training do you have in that field of study?
So in forensic video analysis, specifically, I've got over 1,400 hours of education and continuing education over the course of my career. I am a LEVA, that's L-E-V-A, Law Enforcement and Emergency Services Video Association International certified forensic video analyst. And that's a certification that is an earned certification through proficiency testing and education and an examination by a board of examiners of the work that I've conducted. I'm also certified by the International Association for Identification as a forensic video examiner. That is an earned certification that is achieved through successful completion of a technology examination. If you pass that, then you qualify for a practical examination where you're given media to examine and solve problems with that media. I have received certification through NATIA, N-A-T-I-A, that's the National Technical Investigators Association, as a technical investigator. And that is a certification that is earned through examination for your understanding of engineering and electronics as it relates to surveillance.
Are you at any point called upon to teach in these areas of expertise?
Yes, I am.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So LEVA is the organization through which I've earned most of my training. And over the time, they have invited me to be a contract instructor for them. So to date, I have over 2,000 hours of instruction around the world for them. I've been fortunate enough to teach across the United States to law enforcement, to crime lab personnel, private investigators, attorneys, throughout Canada, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sweden, Oman, the UK. There's been a lot of teaching opportunities for that. I've also been given the opportunity to guest lecture at UW-Platteville, at Gateway Technical College in Kenosha, Blackhawk Technical College in Janesville, the National Forensic Academy at the University of Tennessee, and Marshall University in West Virginia. I have taught forensic video analysis and ethics courses at Madison College. I think it was about 7 years. And I've taught a video evidence course at Fox Valley Technical College in Appleton, Wisconsin.
Aside from, and putting this case aside and what you did in this investigation, what types of video problems that do law enforcement have where maybe your expertise is called upon to help them solve? And I guess the better question is, what types of things would you get involved in to help maybe detectives or beat cops solve something they have with a video problem?
So the discipline that I'm trained in and that I perform is forensic video analysis. And that's defined as the scientific examination, comparison, and or evaluation of video and legal matters. The idea is that there should be a systematic and methodical approach to the analysis of data, and the data in this case would be a video, an image, or an audio file. Many times, all we can do as investigators is to just look cognitively at something and try to perceive what we can and make an assessment. The idea with forensic video analysis is that we want to try to get to beyond just a recognition level of understanding, but actually to an identification where we can prove what the data shows through experiments. So forensic video analysis is one of the main duties that I have at the Sheriff's Department. Sometimes it's speed analysis. If there's a traffic fatality and we have video or audio or both of that or imagery, try to reconstruct speed or try to reconstruct locations. Sometimes I am tasked with recording statements of people accused of harming babies. So oftentimes a baby will be injured or killed and then there's no real witnesses to it. And sometimes I will record the statement through a crime scene of somebody recounting the events prior to the baby being in distress. I video record homicide scenes. So in this case, I recorded the homicide scene. I conduct surveillance. I will sometimes do height analysis. So for bank robberies, serious cases, sometimes the question being asked is, how tall is this person? Can we possibly eliminate them as a suspect based on their perceived height? We can perceive height, but we also want to try to prove height, and that can be done in many instances with video. Reconstruction and recreation of events. I've done that a number of times in my career where we will try to recreate events. Today I'll talk a bit about some recreation through a process called reverse projection, where recently I worked a case where the question was, where was this camera when it took this video? And so it was an hours-long process of trying to locate in three-dimensional space where that camera was when it took the images that were involved in that investigation.
And you're wearing a badge, so I'll ask you, are you, in addition to all of that, are you also a sworn law enforcement officer?
Yes, I've been a sheriff's deputy for 28 years.
Okay. Showing you what's been marked in this case is exhibit number 307. Can you tell us what that is?
This is my curriculum vitae.
And approximately how many pages is this?
Oh, I don't know, 25 pages.
All right. And is that a summary of your training experience and perhaps some of your education as well?
It is.
All right, I'll move 307 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
In this specific case, at some point were you asked to become involved regarding a video of a homeowner named Colin Lynch who lived on Bridgman Road, perhaps behind the Halderson residence, who had a video facing the rear of his property?
I was.
And did you talk to Mr. Lynch?
I did several times.
And initially, were you able to obtain that video from him?
I was.
How so?
Initially, a copy of the video was provided me by Dane County Deputy Sheriff Michael Wilk. And as I was looking at the video, trying to assess what we had, what we didn't have, what the limitations were with the evidence that we had received, one of the questions that I often ask, especially in very serious cases such as this one, is do we have the purest form, the best evidence possible from that recorder, that DVR, called a digital video recorder. And so initially I worked with the copy that had been given to me, and then eventually I was able to get a video in a couple different formats from that DVR, and I could make an assessment in the laboratory if I had the purest form of what was there.
Sure. And we're going to look at your report, and I know there's a PowerPoint, and we're going to see some video here in a second. But before we do that, I want to ask you, at the time you were performing this work, were you involved in other aspects of the investigation into the deaths of Bart and Krista Halderson?
Yes, I was.
And just to summarize for the jury so they know maybe what was in your mind while performing some of this work, what you knew around the time that you started performing this work about the investigation.
When the events unfolded at the Halderson residence, I was out of town on personal business, and I believe it was on July 9th, I was contacted by my supervisor. He was then a lieutenant. His name was Matthew Carls, K-A-R-L-S, and he informed me that the Haldersons had disappeared initially and that it was turning into a homicide investigation. And I had also noticed that while I was out of town, just checking news headlines online. So I knew when I came back to work that we were going to be in what we call major case mode, where all resources are devoted to the investigation of the crimes. So I knew that body parts had been found prior to my involvement with the case. And if I remember correctly, an arrest had been made just prior to me getting involved in the case as well. I was shown a couple of photographs of the inside of the Halderson residence. I was informed that it appeared to have been a fire in and around the fireplace in the lower level of the family room at the house. And I was informed that no bodies were found. Typically in our homicides, we find bodies right there, and in this case, that wasn't the situation.
And you produced a report in this case, did you not?
I did.
It's a somewhat extensive report, but I'll provide it to you. I've marked in this case exhibit number 313. Would you absolutely take a drink of water and then take a look at that and let me know, is that your report that you've produced in this case?
Yes, this is my report.
Approximately how many pages is that?
When printed, this report is 36 pages.
And does that summarize your findings into this investigation?
Yes, it does.
All right. I'll move 313 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
And I'll show you 308. What does that appear to be?
This is a thumb drive, and it's labeled Kuhn's Light Analysis PowerPoint.
And if you produced a PowerPoint in this case to display to the jury, perhaps, what's in your report in a more easy to understand fashion.
Yes, I did.
All right. I'll move 308 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
I'll move to publish.
You may.
So as we're queuing this up, I have a couple questions for you. What was the question you were trying to answer in this report? What was the question at hand?
Well, when I initially got briefed on this case upon my return to Madison, I made contact with Deputy Sheriff Mike Wilk. He had been assigned to look at the video from 7022 Bridgman Road, Mr. Lynch's DVR video, and to catalog the series of events chronologically that he observed in the video. I've trained Mike Wilk in the past at Madison College, so I'm familiar with him and his work. And I said, Mike, let's meet. I just want you to show me what you see, what you don't see, and what your observations are. And he indicated to me that on the video there was a flickering light that he believed was coming from the Halderson residence on the early morning hours of July 2nd, 2021. And I said, what do you believe that light to be? He said, I think it's a fire in that family room at the house. And I asked him why he believed that, and he said things that made sense to me. It's a flickering light. He had knowledge. He told me that there was a fireplace in that room, and I had not yet at that point been in the house. And I said, well, how do you know it's coming from that window? He said, well, I've looked at daytime video, and I think that's where it is. So I looked at that video, and not being familiar at that point with the residents, I thought, he's probably right, but really it's a perception thing. We perceived it probably was that window. So the question I posed to him and to Detectives Shunk and Sims is, I think we have an opportunity here with this video to not only perceive what we think was the source of that light, but to prove it. And so the question really was, where was that light coming from? Not what the source of the light was, but where in the Halderson residence was that coming from?
And so you talked a little bit about forensic video analysis, and you have a slide here. It says the scientific examination, comparison, and or evaluation of video in legal matters. That's perhaps a technical definition, but what's a layman's definition of what this is, what we're about to do?
Sure. So on slide 2 here, I've got the textbook definition of forensic video analysis, but the idea is that regardless of whether it's a liquor theft or a homicide, as an analyst, I should be clinically looking at the data, trying to understand what it can prove, what it cannot prove, what its limitations are, and how firm of a foundation do we have on the data that we're relying upon. If you don't have a forensic video analyst involved between the viewing of the video and the interpretation of the video, the interpretation could be skewed. I use the example sometimes of looking at WebMD. I may not feel well, and I could look at WebMD, and I could diagnose myself with all sorts of things. I might be right, I might be wrong, but I'm not qualified to say. The idea with forensic video analysis is that anybody can look at video, and sometimes we're right in what we perceive from those recordings, but a forensic video analyst is trained to set aside feelings and things that might be contextually bias-based and objectively look at the data and see what it might prove.
Sure. Why do we need you? Why can't I just go on my computer and just zoom in with my fingers and just make an educated guess? What do you add to the mix?
So what a forensic video analyst does is tries to make sure that if science can be applied appropriately, and if it is the right thing to do in terms of can we answer a question, if there's a testable question, something we can quantify, height, speed, identification, in this case, identification, we should try to do that in a valid, repeatable, reproducible manner. So the idea there is that, can I do experiments over and over again and get the same or similar result? Also, can I hand off the data and my report to a like-trained analyst, and could they, without any knowledge of the case, work the data and get the same or similar result if their training and experience and tools are comparable?
Is it your belief and your testimony that your work in this case and in other cases where you perform forensic video analysis can be replicated by other similarly trained people?
Absolutely.
And they, for all intents and purposes, should, if the work is done correctly or in the same way, would probably find exactly the same result.
They will get the same result.
The north side of the Halderson residence was, in fact, the area that you were concerned with, correct?
That is correct.
Here's a photograph. This photograph appears to be taken on July 22nd, 2021. Just a couple of questions. In this photograph, are we looking at essentially the backyard, looking at the Halderson house?
That's correct. I took this photograph in the backyard at the Halderson residence.
And at your back, when you took this photograph, was that the pond?
Yes.
Okay. The windows are blacked out. Could you just, did law enforcement place that there, or was that like that when you arrived at the scene?
I was at the scene a number of times, in the house, around the house, on a number of different occasions. And on July 22nd, when I was there, I spoke with Deputy Sheriff Greg Leatherberry. We've worked hand in hand on crime scenes for many years. And he said, by the way, he said the lower level windows in this tri-level house have a black canvas or covering over the windows. And he just wanted to make sure I was aware of that. He asked me if I needed to take those down for any reason. I said no. You know, if we want privacy, we have to create it. And so in homicide investigations in particular, we try to cover up out of sensitivity to the victims and in trying to keep the investigation pure and keep prying eyes from looking into areas that they need not look. The two windows on the lower level in the center were covered, as well as the window on the right, which was the north garage window.
Okay, law enforcement placed that.
Law enforcement placed that on there.
Here you add some labels. What are we looking at there?
Yes, so to try to do the analysis of where the light source was coming from on the early morning hours of July 2nd, I just put annotations on this image to help familiarize people with what these windows represented. So the window on the far left is what I labeled dining room window number 1. It is in the dining room. The next one to the right is kitchen window number 2. That's the window above the kitchen sink. Kitchen door number 3 had a window in it. It was a walk-through door that went from near the pantry in the kitchen out onto a deck area. Fireplace window number 4, again, my terminology was the window closest to the fireplace in the lower level of the home. Number 5, family room door. That was a walk-through door in that same family room. To the right, TV window number 6. That was a window closest to a television, a flat-screen TV that was mounted on the wall, the west wall of that family room. And then finally, garage north window number 7. That was a small window that was on the north side of the garage.
And we're going to continue to use these labels as we go through your presentation, correct?
That's correct.
What is this?
So slide number 6 that you're looking at is from Google Maps. I've got the hyperlink there on the image. Part of my job involves certified drone operations, and typically in a case such as this, I would fly a drone and we would take pictures from the air to try to demonstrate from a bird's eye view what we have there. This location is not far from the Dane County Regional Airport, so there are some restrictions in flying a drone, as well as we have a limit on how high we can fly drones. So in this case, it was more advantageous to use Google Maps. The reason I put this image in this presentation is to try to orient people to where the camera was at Colin Lynch's house at 7022 Bridgman Road versus the Halderson residence. So on the lower right, I've indicated camera location at 7022 Bridgman Road. The camera was located on the underside of a decking structure, the deck for the upper level deck. The camera upper left-hand corner of this image, I've labeled Halderson residence. You can see the roof there in that image. And then with yellow annotations, I have indicated the approximate field of view of that camera.
What are we looking at here?
So slide number 8, I put some sample images for a better understanding of what the field of view was from the CCTV or closed circuit television system there. The image on the left is from the daytime on July 2nd. It has no particular significance other than that is just the field of view. You can see the pool area of Mr. Lynch's residence. Further into the scene behind the pool is his backyard. It's grass. Beyond that is the pond. And then way off in the distance, where I have a red line kind of pointing toward the top of that image, is where the Halderson residence is located. That same view at nighttime, indicated on the right side of the screen, is from the early morning hours of July 2nd, 2021. And it's the same scene, just at night.
Okay. You've mentioned a couple of times, we're talking about a several-hour period. Very early, when we say early morning hours, just the first leading into the second, but those early morning hours of July 2nd, for a several-hour period, there was a flickering light that you were concerned with, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what is this right here?
Excuse me. In slide number 9, a flickering light was recorded on CCTV for several hours at the Halderson residence. This image is enlarged to try to show where on that image you could see, if you watched, where that light was coming from. So I've got a red line here pointing to where that flickering light was located on the Halderson property.
Slide 10, what are we looking at there?
So slide number 10, this is a small video sample of that flickering light, enlarged 2 times. And I think it's like a 10-second video. If you hover, you can play it, and it's just a short little clip. If you look carefully where that red line is pointing when the video plays, there is a flickering light in that location.
And we'll look at a good deal of video here in a moment. The unknown is, right, and I think we already talked about this. The question you're trying to answer, the unknown, is which window was associated with that flickering light for that several-hour period in those early morning hours of the second.
That's correct.
Okay. You had to answer some questions to solve this question, I would imagine. First being, how was the video file constructed that you had?
Yes, much like when you go to the doctor, they make a visual assessment of you. They listen to you and your symptoms and your explanation of what your issues are. They may do some medical tests, take your pulse, check your respirations, different things, trying to figure out, what is the cause or what is going on. The same thing is true in forensic video analysis. It is not proper to just start diving in and looking at video, but rather interrogating or trying to examine the characteristics of the file or files that you received, because it's that training and experience of how those files are constructed which inform your decisions about what we can say about the video and what we can't say. It shows us our limitations, and it's important to know our limitations going in.
And that brings us to our next slide. What are we looking at there?
Right, so if we start from the top to the bottom just briefly, kind of big to small, I received a bunch of video files, quite a few of them. Those video files were made up of what are called GOPs, G-O-P-S. Those are groups of pictures. So they're families of images that are grouped together mathematically that construct a video. So when we look at a video, it just looks like a video. You hit play and it just runs. But in many of the videos, in fact, most of the videos we look at, there's actually groupings of frames that go together. So those groups of pictures are made up of frames. So if you were to pause a video and just look at a picture, that is a frame of video. There's a frame rate associated with videos. How many refresh pictures do we get every second? Those frames are broken down into smaller segments called pixels. Those pixels are generally little squares of information, and those pixels are finally made up of color channels, reds, greens, and blues. So video is what's called an additive process, where we take primary colors of red, green, and blue. They're mixed together to make all the colors that we see in video, secondary colors. The color channels are what we're at issue here, because those color channels allow us to perceive brightness and color in an image. So that's what is of most importance to me in my analysis in this case, was in the pixels, what were the RGB or red, green, blue values of the pixels defining where that flickering light was located.
And slide 14, is this an example of pixels, essentially?
That's correct. So on slide 14, I put annotations that show an exaggerated view of what we see, where the image on the left is a sample image from the closed-circuit video system at 7022 Bridgman Road. I've put an annotation on the left side of 240 and on the bottom 352. That's the pixel count. Vertically, this image is made up of 240 pixels tall, and horizontally 352 pixels wide. On the right side of the screen, I have shown a small portion and large, the idea that we don't normally see pixels.
That major picture, or that larger picture, what is that?
Second floor patio at the Lynch residence, and obviously that was right in front of the camera. We see that illuminated here because the camera itself has what's called near infrared capability. It's got illuminators or LEDs around the lens, so that at night you can see in what's an otherwise dark environment. You wouldn't see much with your eyes, but the camera can see differently than your eyes can see. And so we see that reflected here, not only off the ground in the foreground, but also off of that beam.
Okay. So when we talk about pixels, the pixels, you pull out an example there. That example has no significance other than you just pulled that one out, right?
Correct.
Okay. Can you identify, or is there a process for identifying where those pixels are on a video that you're looking at?
Yes, there are. So,
and I'll move to the next slide, 15.
Yeah, so slide 15, I put a couple examples in here just to try to illustrate. I like to think of it this way. When we used to hold paper maps and you're trying to find a street or you're trying to find a city, you'd look in the alphabetical listing, where is East Washington Avenue? You find it and it would say L6. You follow down a grid of letters, follow over a grid of numbers, kind of an XY coordinate thing, and then you'd find where you're looking. The same way here. So the way video is structured, the pixels always start with the location of 0. So in the upper left-hand corner in this example, that pixel in the upper left-hand corner would be X position 0, Y position 0, 0, 0. That is its location in two-dimensional space.
Got it. And so if we look at the next slide, perhaps the different corner.
Yeah, so the second example here I made in slide 16 is the opposite. The lower right-hand corner, it's at its maximum X value. It's all the way to the right. It's at its maximum Y value all the way at the bottom. So we would have an X, Y coordinate of 351, 239. And again, those numbers are one less than the total width and height of that image because we start counting at 0 instead of 1.
So these pixels essentially can be placed on a graph.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the question becomes then, the flickering window, what are the XY coordinates of that, correct?
That's what was of concern, yes. Where were they located?
And so when we talk about your overall question, which is which windows for flickering, this is maybe the first big question that has to be answered.
Yes.
Okay. But there were some challenges in answering that question.
Yes, there were.
All right. Let's talk about those challenges. And you can start from the top and we'll go down.
Yes, so digital multimedia evidence, video, audio, still images, a term called metadata, the data that's embedded into these files, are what's of importance. And when we study digital multimedia evidence, it's often very different than the type of video you might see from a television station. I had the good fortune of working for 2 television stations prior to working here, and the goal was to make the pictures as pretty as possible. In forensic video analysis, we're often dealing with data that isn't very good. It has a lot of challenges, and in this case, the biggest challenge as I saw it was the distance from the lens. So the target, the thing we're trying to observe, wasn't up close. It wasn't like I put a camera in front of somebody or took a selfie and you fill the frame with the information. In this investigation, the distance from the lens at Colin Lynch's house across the pond to the Halderson residence was 367 feet. That is quite a distance. When you couple that with a wide-angle lens, most closed-circuit television cameras have a wide-angle lens, so they can cover a wide area. You may want to cover your whole front yard or a whole area in an entryway to your business or something. The wide-angle lens makes objects appear smaller than they really are. So when you have a wide-angle lens coupled with a long distance, objects appear quite small. And if they're small, there's less detail. Video resolution. The idea with video resolution is if, television pictures are rectangular. So if you think back to school, how do you get the area of a rectangle? It's width times height. That's how we calculate what's called spatial resolution of video, where we would multiply the width in pixels by the height, and that gives us our count. So if you have a camera that's rated as a 12 megapixel camera, it's really just the product of the width times the height. That's how you kind of get there. In this case, this video resolution is 352 by 240. To give you perspective, HD or high definition, 1920 by 1080. So the total resolution for every frame of video here is about 4% of the area of HD. So we're not dealing with a very large data set. We have very limited data available to us. And again, the targets were small, the house windows. That's what was of interest in this investigation. The lighting conditions were a challenge here. The video in question was at night, so it's dark out. The near-infrared lighting from the camera presents 2 different contrast ranges. So in the foreground, we have a lot of contrast. We have brights, we have darks, we have midtones. In the distance, we don't have all that contrast. It's very dark across the backyard and out onto the pond and out onto the Halderson's property. And finally, one of the biggest ones is what's called lossy, L-O-S-S-Y, video data compression. Every digital video recorder that records cameras has to apply what's called lossy data compression. The idea is that when the video files are manufactured in that recorder, if they are not reduced in logical file size or how much space they take on the hard drive, the average consumer of that video would only be able to keep video for a very short time. Could be hours, might be a day. So lossy video compression allows the DVR to be able to store days, weeks, or months of video. And it's a destructive process. So what happens with lossy data compression is we start to lose what's called high frequency details. Things that show scars, marks, tattoos, small details. Our eyes aren't as sensitive to that. So the idea with the engineering is that let's just discard that information. We can still communicate the idea and people kind of won't notice or care. The other thing that can be affected and is affected with lossy data compression is color purity. How pure are the colors? So if I've got a black shirt on, would it appear black in the video or would it be some impure color that kind of approximates black? In this case, color was not an issue because the camera was in that nighttime mode. And so the frequencies of near infrared are beyond and infrared are beyond our ability to really see with our eyes. So the camera appears to be black and white when in fact it's a color camera. So these all kind of were in my mind as challenges that would make it more difficult to try to come to an answer of where that window was located versus just looking at the video and knowing readily right away.
Despite these challenges, was it your impression that you could still march on and try to answer that overall question of which window was flickering?
It was.
And you used a process called reverse projection, correct?
Yes.
Reverse projection, the scientific process of determining the position, size, or height of an object captured in a video image, achieved by superimposing and aligning the original image over a control image with the same or identical camera in the same position. So tell us about that real quick, other than just what's on the screen. What is this?
So reverse projection has been around in the forensic community, I think, since the 70s. It was originally used by traffic investigators. If a photograph was taken at a traffic crash scene, the idea was you could go back to that location, figure out where that photo was taken. Once they're what's called registered or aligned, the historic image with a new image you might take would allow you to make measurements and to place markers and to place things. So reverse projection is used as a very powerful tool in our forensic processes here at the Sheriff's Office for, again, achieving an understanding of height of a person, location of debris at a traffic crash, location of vehicles at a traffic crash, and in this case, trying to locate where the windows were located in the darkness off in the distance. So we have historic images from July 2nd. The goal then would be to take new images, superimpose them, make sure they're aligned in the X direction, left and right, the Y direction, up and down, the Z direction, in and out, depth, and then the rotationally. And we were in a good position in this case because the target hadn't moved. The Halderson residence is still in the same spot, hasn't moved. The Lynch residence hasn't moved. The camera had not moved from what we could tell. So we didn't have the amount of work we would where we say, where on earth was this picture taken? We already knew some of those variables were already controlled. And so it was just a matter of going through the work of trying to figure out, where those windows were located.
Right. So you had your images from July 2nd, and then on July 30th, you go out with a couple guys to the Lynch residence and to the Halderson residence, and you perform kind of this experiment of sorts.
Yes.
Okay. You involve Mr. Wilk, Deputy Wilk, and tell me how this process worked.
Yeah, so one of the things that I always want to do before we embark on any kind of reconstructive work at a crime scene is to try to determine, do we have variables that have changed that are going to affect the experiment? So the most obvious one to me is, do we have the same camera, the same lens, the same connectors, the same wiring, the same DVR, all of that? Because if you don't have the same recording device, you can still do the work, but I think it diminishes the strength of an opinion that can be formed from the data you collect. And so in this case, I had a couple conversations with Mr. Lynch, one I think by phone, asking him those very questions. Have you done anything to your recorder? No, I haven't done anything, he responded. I said, good, and I was seeking his consent to be able to do these experiments because we would have to gain access to his home and access to his digital video recording system in the home, as well as be in the backyard again of the Halderson residence after dark. And he said he would allow us to do that work. And so I talked to Deputy Wilk. I spoke to my supervisor, Lieutenant Carls, and said this is what I think we should do here, is to try to get a greater understanding of where that light was coming from. I received the go-ahead from the administration at the Sheriff's Department to do this work. So on July 30th, it was a Friday evening, I met in front of the Halderson residence with Deputy Wilk and with Lieutenant Carls. I briefed them again on what I wanted them to do. And what I had done was I took a 48-inch piece of angle iron steel and I connected magnetic LED lights to it. So we had approximately 3 feet of vertical light. And then the bottom foot of that stick, kind of like a lightsaber, you could hold on to without having lights beneath your hands. What I told Deputy Wilk was I said, we're going to be in cell phone contact. I'm going to be over at the Lynch residence across the pond. You, Deputy Wilk, are going to be in the Halderson backyard. I said, I'm going to give you direction where I want you to stand. And when I give you the command, what I'd like you to do is take that lightsaber, that stick, and just move it slowly in front of the window of where you're standing. I don't want you to wave it wide. I don't want you to hold it up high or low. I want you to be in front of, from the camera's perspective, where the frame of the windows would be. And I said, I'll tell you when to stop, and I'll tell you when to move to the next window. So I gave him kind of an idea of what we're going to do, so once we did it, it would go quickly and efficiently, so we didn't inconvenience Mr. Lynch beyond what we needed to do.
Got it. So to recreate the experiment, you essentially had another deputy who you were on the phone with, who stood in front of the windows, moving a light around as you filmed him, presumably with the same camera from Mr. Lynch.
Yes.
Okay. But you discovered an offset, correct, in your work over at Mr. Lynch's house?
Yes, I did. So we conducted these experiments, collected the data from the DVR, and I went back to the laboratory at the sheriff's office and started examining the data. And to try to say, well, we want apples to apples comparison, we have to make sure that that's the case. Mr. Lynch told me that he had not done anything to his DVR system, but he did say to me, he said he had been doing some reconstruction work on the deck, I think replacing some deck boards or something. He said they've been doing a lot of hammering, sawing, pounding. He said there's a possibility that the camera might have moved, but he said he had not done anything to move that camera or to alter it in any way. When I was in the laboratory trying to register the images from July 2nd with the images we collected from July 30th, the Y direction, the vertical, was dead on. It was in exactly the same tilted position, up and down. The X position, however, the left and right, was off. And I saw what you see here as a sample, as an example, that the pillar was offset. When I measured how far it was offset, it was 7 pixels. And so that had to be factored into the calculations of the XY coordinates of every window that we were going to measure, that, okay, these camera is essentially in the same location. However, it had moved by the equivalent of 7 pixels on the recording.
Okay. In many ways, you're lucky that this pillar was here and that it was an immediate, obvious error that needed to be corrected in the camera.
That's correct.
Okay. And so you say when you performed this work, you had to adjust 7 pixels to the left, and that brought you back into the original state of the Lynch video on the night of July 2nd.
Yes.
Okay. In performing this work, you did something called frame averaging. Quickly, if you could tell us what that is.
Yes, so frame averaging is what's called a noise reduction process. Whenever you record video, audio, or still images, you get what's called a signal to noise ratio. Signal is the stuff you want. Noise is the stuff you don't want. So in this case, the signal are the things in the scene we want to record. The noise is generated by the image sensor in the camera, the circuitry in the camera. Noise can be generated by the compression process in the digital video recorder. Cumulatively, all these things become visual problems for us to try to see clearly. What frame averaging does for us is, instead of just stopping the video on one frame and taking a look and making an assessment, what we do is we take subsequent frames and we mathematically average them together. So the idea is, in any sampling, if I just take one sample of a population, I can make an assessment, but that assessment may or may not be right. The reality is we would have to take more samples to know if our result is reflective of the population. If I were to look at one image and say, ooh, there's a flickering window, I might be right, but the reality is I don't know. So I want to sample multiple images, and in this case I sampled over 90,000 images to make sure that we consistently saw a flickering light in the same position throughout that duration of time. What frame averaging does is it allows us to see mathematically what happened in that area during that time, because images are just numbers. So those RGB values for each pixel, if we were to average those together over time, that allows us to see what's normally there. Visually, what that does for me is it allows me to more clearly see the edges of that bright window in that dark environment.
So using frame averaging, you were able to determine what the XY coordinates of the flickering window were.
I did.
And if we're zoomed in now, obviously really close, I think everyone can see the timestamp, but that white thing on the right, that's the pole that we've been looking at the whole time, but now we're zoomed in, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So at that point, you know the coordinates of this window that was flickering, and you're out there doing this experiment, and you have this guy over there, this other deputy waving the light stick around, and you're going to frame average those images as well to come up with the experiment image, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so then you're going to start comparing and contrasting. So let's start with the dining room window, the first one. So we're going to move left to right, correct?
That is correct.
All right, so dining room window on the far left. What are we looking at there? And we'll go through this one with some detail, and then we'll move a little quicker because some of these are going to be quite similar. But what are we looking at there?
Sure. So what I've got here on slide number 30 is a frame averaged image on the left of the flickering window, the questioned image from the night of July 2nd. Its companion to the right is Deputy Wilk in a frame-averaged set of images standing in front of the dining room window to try to show the two locations of the flickering window, which is the questioned window, versus the known window, which was dining room window number 1.
Right. On the right image, this is your experiment, and you look to have essentially duct taped an iPad to that pole at this point, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's a clock on there?
Yeah, because I didn't really know what all testing we were going to need to do. And so I took an iPad and just strapped it to the pole to make sure it was in the image, ran a stopwatch so I had a time reference that was reliable if we needed to do any timing information in the future.
Right. The time's not going to be relevant for us today, though.
No.
Okay. But if anyone's ever confused, the image with the clock on it or that you have on that pole, that's the sample image that you took from your experiment.
That's correct.
And the other one is the actual raw footage from the night of July 2nd, or the early morning hours of July 2nd.
Yes.
What are we looking at there?
So in slide 31, these are the same images, just enlarged slightly and cropped to help better focus on the area of interest, which is the two windows, the question window on the left from the night of July 2nd, or the morning of July 2nd, rather, and then on the right from our first test in front of the dining room window.
Right. So you determined then the XY coordinates of the flickering window. We already had those. And then the XY coordinates of your sample of the dining room window, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you laid those on a graph.
Yeah, I made in slide 34 a graphic representation to help better visually show the actual locations in two-dimensional space. So video is just a two-dimensional representation of that scene. So in 2 dimensions, if we were to go to the next slide, the red box on the left is the location of the dining room light where Deputy Wilkes stood, waved his light. I frame averaged through to try to see on average where the light fell. And on the right is the location of the flickering window.
And you reached a conclusion.
Right. So in the first experiment, the conclusion was that the flickering light on July 2nd was not coming from the dining room light, or the dining room window, rather.
Okay. So we'll keep walking across the back side of the Halderson house. Now we're on to kitchen window 2. You performed the same experiment with Deputy Wilk, moving the light around that night.
That's correct.
And again, we have our coordinates that are known of the flickering window, the coordinates that you obtained from your experiment, and you laid those on a graph, correct?
I did. So in slide 43, again, a representation of where those windows were, and the image, or the red block on the left represents the location of that kitchen window, and the red block on the right is the location of the flickering light from the morning of July 2nd.
And you reached a conclusion there.
I did. So like the first experiment, the second experiment was that the conclusion was that the flickering light was not coming from the kitchen window on July 2nd.
We'll keep going. Kitchen door. Now we're in the third light in from the left at the kitchen door. We have our images there, same as before, of the original image, the sample image from the test, the coordinates we've been looking at, and the coordinates you were able to obtain from your experiments. You laid those on a graph as well.
Yeah, so in slides 52 and 53, I'm showing in red the locations of where those lights were. The image, the red area on the left is actually the kitchen door light location in 2 dimensions. And on the right, the flickering light location from the early morning hours of July 2nd.
And you reached a conclusion there.
I did. The flickering light was not coming on July 2nd from the kitchen door.
All right. Now we're on to the fireplace window, the fourth window in. Here on the left, the original frame average of the original image from the Lynch house in the early morning hours of the second. On the right, your experiment with Deputy Wilk moving that light around, correct?
Correct.
Okay. There are the coordinates that you were able to obtain from the original Lynch video. And on the right, are those the coordinates that you were able to obtain from frame averaging your experiment?
They are.
Okay. And you laid those on a graph.
I did. So in slides 61 and 62 of this presentation, it's hard to show things that are on top of one another. So what I showed in red here was the location of the flickering window from July 2nd. And on top of it, with green dots, I showed the corners of where our light test showed the location of Deputy Wilkes standing.
Is that perhaps a more zoomed-in version of what you were trying to show there?
That's correct.
Okay. You reached a conclusion there.
Yes, so in slide 64, the conclusion was clear to me that the flickering light from July 2nd was coming from the fireplace window, the window closest to the fireplace.
Okay. And then we'll just talk quickly about the remainder, of course. You went through all of the windows on the rear side on that first level, correct?
Correct.
Okay. We're now talking about the family room door, same process, the original image, the image from the test. You laid the coordinates from each one, put them on a graph, and reached a conclusion that regarding the family room door. And what was that conclusion?
I did. In slide 73, the flickering light on July 2nd was not coming from the family room or from the family room door.
Excellent. Then just briefly to TV room 6. So now we're the 6th window over from the left. Same process, the original image, sample image, the coordinates of the pixels. You laid it on a graph and reached a conclusion there. What is that conclusion?
Yes, in slide 82, the flickering light on July 2nd was not coming from the TV window.
Okay. Now we're looking at, lastly, on this image, or this PowerPoint, the garage north window. That's that farthest window to the right, correct?
Correct.
Right. Same process. You had your original image, you had your experiment, and you reached a conclusion there.
Yes, so in slide 86, the conclusion on that experiment was that the flickering light on July 2nd was not coming from the garage north window.
Just briefly tell us about this slide and why you included it.
So in slide 87, this is image 80,389 from the crime scene video that I recorded throughout the scene. And it shows the window from the inside closest to the fireplace. This is what I've been referring to in the experiments as fireplace window number 4.
Okay. And it is your conclusion that it was this window that was the source of the flickering light in the early morning hours of July 2nd?
Yes.
To calculate some uncertainty here, correct?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So whenever we're doing experiments with data, it's important to try to identify any uncertainties, things that we can know. Some people call them error rates. I don't know if that terminology is exactly appropriate in this discipline. Uncertainties are the terminology that I received in my training from the folks at the FBI in doing the reverse projection. There's certain certainties that we can calculate, and there's certain things we cannot calculate because we'll never know. In this case, there was an uncertainty that could be calculated, and that's called resolution uncertainty. So in slide 88 here, I listed it's the smallest possible measure that can be deduced from a two-dimensional recording. And that's affected by the camera, lens, recording, all the factors that I mentioned earlier. So we want to say what, in terms of granularity, what's the smallest thing we could see from this recording?
Okay. And you included a photograph there.
Yes, so in slide 89, I've annotated the dimensions of the windows that I took with a Stanley tape measure when I was in the Halderson's backyard to have an idea of what is the actual measurement of those windows versus the perceived measurement in terms of pixels on the recording.
Okay. And you calculated some uncertainty there.
Yes, so here I've put side by side the same window, fireplace window 4. On the left, the height was 49 inches tall. On video, on the right, it was 4 pixels tall. And likewise, the horizontal measurement on the left, 72 inches wide was that window. On video, it was 6 pixels wide. So if we do the mathematics on it, on the next slide here, it'll show if we divide 72 inches wide by 6 pixels wide, we end up with 12 inches per pixel horizontally. So every time we saw one of those little squares in video, it represented a measurement of approximately 12 inches. So we wouldn't see a little tiny detail like you would if you took a selfie or you had a camera up close. 12 inches horizontal, and vertically, mathematically, it came out to 12.25 inches. So anything smaller than that, we just can't tell from that distance.
Okay. So after calculating the uncertainty and looking into all the variables and all of your work, based on your training and experience, is it your testimony that, in fact, fireplace window 4 was the source of the light in the early morning hours of July 2nd?
Yes, it is.
All you might want to take a drink of water. I'm just going to ask to approach the judge here for 1 second.
We've been here an hour. If you're okay for the next 40 minutes, we'll go ahead and proceed forward. If anybody needs the break now, we'll take it. Does anybody need to break now, or can we go forward? Let's go forward. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
And you're okay, sir?
I'm fine, thank you.
No, I asked you, I guess.
Sorry.
All right.
After essentially concluding in this case that Fireplace Window 4 was the source of the flickering light, you were actually asked to look at the video itself and do some work on the video to put it in a more presentable fashion of those early morning hours of July 2nd.
Yes.
What did you do?
So there was a lot more video that we had than what we're going to present today. But the main focus in this part of the investigation was that flickering light. So I took the video, enlarged the video, and I was asked to try to speed it up so we didn't have to look at hours of video, is to try to take portions and speed it up in terms of frame rate, so it would go much faster than real time. We still see the effect of the flickering light, and at other portions to let it run at one time speed so that we could see it in real time, and then just kind of show the duration of that morning, what was seen in that window, Fireplace Window number 4.
Sure. And just so everyone's on the same page, when you say you enlarge the video, are you confident that you're staying authentic to the video or that you're not altering it in any way?
That's right. And whenever I do enlargements in the laboratory, I do it in multiple fashions so that I can try to see the visual effect of different types of enlargements that can be done.
Okay. I'm showing what's been marked in this case as exhibit number 315. At least from the labels on this, does this appear to be the video presentation that you put together regarding the early morning hours of July 2nd at the Halderson home in that flickering window?
It does.
All right, I'll move 315 into evidence and ask to publish it.
Any objection?
No objection.
It is received. It may be published.
And while the detective is queuing that up, the video's, I think, 35, 40 minutes long, around there.
I think so, yes.
Okay. I'll mostly sit silent, and I understand the video's silent, but I'll promise you the jury's already had a couple opportunities to watch long, silent videos in this case. But I may chime in at times and pause it to ask you questions about why you chose to speed up or slow down during certain portions. And in fact, when we start playing the video, we'll pause it, and I'll just have you explain what the jury's looking at briefly. Take the screen off and put it back on. Sometimes resetting it helps. Let me try that one more time. If you could. Just play out. Just hear it.
Maybe we should take that break after all.
Nothing's happening on that unit either? Okay. All right, let's take our 10, folks. Thanks.
All rise for the jury.
All right, folks, I am James Langer, the digital content manager for channel3000.com. Obviously, some technical issues going on in court that they're trying to figure out, so they decided to take their 10-minute break now so the prosecution can finish wrestling with the computers and see if they can get that video to play. If you're just joining us this morning and are trying to get caught up here, wondering what's going on, I'll kind of break things down. So, we started a little more than an hour ago. We've already heard from a few witnesses called to the stand by the prosecution. The first person that we heard from this morning was a neighbor who lives across the street from the Halderson house. He said he reported smelling wood burning on the evening, I believe, of July 1st, and said it was a smoky, woody smell at first, like somebody was starting a fire or had a fire pit going, but over a few minutes there, the smell started to change, and it smelled like, he said, meat cooking. Like he thought it was somebody having a pig roast or something like that, trying to roast the entire pig. So he thought that was a little bit unusual, and he said over the course of a few minutes there, the smell really became pungent. It was the word that he used to describe that. And he even went kind of walking around the neighborhood to see if he could determine where that came from. He's also a former law enforcement officer, former detective, so he was kind of curious and kind of investigating on his own, trying to figure out what was going on in the neighborhood. The second person we heard from was another neighbor, this person kind of living across the pond that's in the Halderson's backyard, and he lives on the opposite side of the pond. He has a security system set up in his backyard, kind of showing across the pond, and you can see the Halderson home in the distance. And when police talked to him and looked at his surveillance video from around that time, it was the evening or night of July 1st into the early morning hours of July 2nd. Deputies saw a flickering light, they said, coming from the Halderson home. That's the way they described it. The deputies who first looked at it kind of surmised that it may have come from the fireplace in the family room that we spent a lot of time kind of focused on yesterday. And as we learned yesterday, investigators eventually found bone fragments in that fireplace. Prosecutors believe that Chandler Halderson possibly tried to get rid of some of his parents' remains by burning them in the fireplace, which might explain the smell that some of the neighbors had described, would have explained a flickering light coming from that family room. So who we've heard from third was a deputy from the Dane County Sheriff's Office who's actually a video analysis expert. He's taught a lot of courses on this, really went into detail about his process here, trying to be super transparent about everything in the processes. And he detailed an experiment that they actually did to try to narrow down which window exactly that flickering light came from, just so they could be sure that it was a fire coming from that fireplace, basically. So what he did is he, later that month, set up the experiment where he had another deputy sort of go room to room in the Halderson home and wave basically a light wand, as they described it, in front of various windows that were facing that camera, and going room to room and kind of matching up where in the video they saw that flashing light. Then they were able to determine the exact area where that flickering light came from, and they were able to confirm that the flickering light came from that fireplace in the family room. None of the other rooms matched up when that deputy was flashing that light. So that's kind of where we are right now. They were preparing to play another pretty lengthy video. They said the video was going to take about 35 or 40 minutes to go through all the way. That's the video that they were kind of struggling with to try to get to play. I'm sure lots of us can sympathize with that and kind of wrestling with technology during presentations and things like that. But they were going to take that 10-minute break to see if they could figure that out. Also of note, the judge had let the jury know that he had another thing on his court calendar for about 11:45. So they're kind of in a time crunch here. They want to kind of make sure that they're in lunch by that point as well. But we're kind of just kind of waiting here for that break to get over with and so for trials to resume. So in the meantime, if you missed anything this morning or yesterday was a pretty lengthy day of testimony as well. Lots of physical evidence being presented to the jury. If you have any questions on what investigators found inside that Halderson home, we have a pretty lengthy breakdown of that over at channel3000.com. You can go there to get caught up on anything you might have missed yesterday. You can also go there for any background info on this case. You know, we're in the second week of the trial. If you are just kind of joining in and are kind of wondering what's happened so far, or even have questions about the investigation itself, what police found, what was in the criminal complaints, that sort of thing, we have all of that over at channel3000.com/Halderson. That link that you see there at the bottom of your screen, it's also in the description of these live stream videos as well. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can click that link there for more information as well. We've got the entire timeline of events there that investigators say they've pieced together. We've got literally every story we've ever done on this case dating back to last July. So more than 6 months worth of content there. So plenty to go through if you haven't already checked that out. In the meantime, we will kind of sit tight here and wait for court to resume. Channel3000.com. You can spend the break time there kind of looking through things as well. But we will be back as soon as court is back in session. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Attorney Brown.
Sorry about that, everyone. Before we get going with the video, Deputy Kuntz, the PowerPoint we just looked at, has it been printed off, and is that Exhibit 309?
It is.
And does that appear to be the entire PowerPoint?
It does.
Okay, I'll move 309 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
So as I said before, we're going to now begin playing the video. It's a little over 35 minutes long. Again, just putting everyone in the right mindset, we're talking about the early morning hours of July 2nd, and in fact, there'll be a timestamp on this, correct?
That is correct.
All right, we'll begin playing. And as it's playing, what is the number in the bottom left corner that's moving rapidly?
So in the lower left corner, I added frame numbers. So each frame has an individual number.
And there you've labeled the windows.
That is correct.
And obviously, we've talked before, but you've identified the flickering light as being that number 4, fireplace window.
That is correct.
And there you've overlaid those labels onto the zoomed in part of the screen.
That is correct.
And we have the time there in the very center of the screen. Right now, about 12:19 in the morning.
That's correct.
If we look at the far left, there's a smaller image. Is that the whole image before you zoomed in?
Yes. So the image on the left is the actual size of the video that we received without modifications in size.
And just switched from 9x to 1x. What does that mean?
So I was asked by Detective Sims in preparation for trial to take portions of the flickering light throughout the evening and run it faster than real time, just in the interest of the court's time. And in other sections, just to run it at normal speed, 1x. So those annotations were added by me.
And we'll continue playing it. Just as we're watching this, sometimes it does go down to 1 speed, and sometimes it's at 9. How did you make those decisions?
Well, I didn't make the decisions based on time. The times of regular speed versus accelerated speed were given to me by Detective Sims. And what I deduced from it was when we saw brighter lights, things like that, some of the areas to run it at normal speed. And times in between where it wasn't as bright or there wasn't as much to see, that's when it kind of went into the faster mode. Not exclusively, but for the most part.
Thank you. And we'll continue playing, Deputy. I'll just ask a question to put everything in context. In the next 20 minutes to a half hour or so of this video, as it's sped up, there's going to be times in which that window grows brighter and then maybe other lights come on, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And that'll happen in the next 20 minutes or so of the video, but it's sped up, obviously. So I'll just note at around 2:59, you switched to one-time speed, correct?
That's correct.
And now some additional lights have been illuminated. I think you've identified those as kitchen window, kitchen door.
That's correct.
Some dining room one. And fair to say that just before the 3 a.m. mark, the fireplace window appeared to go dark for a second there.
It did.
Okay. It was a long video to watch. Fair to say that in your profession, watching long pieces of video where nothing's going on is just part of what you do.
It all has to be searched, yes.
Well, I appreciate you speeding it up so we didn't have to watch the 4 or 5 hours there. Just a couple last questions. Based on your analysis, when we went through the PowerPoint, the reverse projection, your view of the camera system, and all of your expert analysis in this case, are you confident that that window that we saw around 3 in the morning that was very, very bright and then just in a snap went dark, are you confident that that is the Fireplace window 4?
Yes, I am.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
No, thank you.
May this witness be excused
You may be excused.
and released?
I'll make a decision on that maybe at the lunch break.
Thank you, Deputy. You're excused from the remainder of today, and I don't think there are any exhibits in front of you.
No.
Have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Counsel.
The state calls Special Agent Bill Boswell.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
If you believe you can safely and responsibly testify without wearing a mask, that would be our preference at this time.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Go right ahead.
Good morning. Please state and spell your name.
It's William Boswell, William. Last name is Boswell, B-O-S as in Sam, W-E-L-L.
And what do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a special agent with the State of Wisconsin Department of Justice.
Any particular area of expertise?
Yes, within a division of criminal investigation, I'm assigned to the Arson Bureau.
What are your roles as a special agent with the Arson Bureau?
With the Arson Bureau, we specifically generally investigate fires and explosions believed to be of an intentional nature, an incendiary intentional act.
Showing it to be marked in this case is exhibit number 314. Just what is that?
That is a copy of my curricula vitae.
I move 314 into evidence.
No objection.
It is received.
Early in your career, how'd you get started in being interested in fire or anything of that sort?
Kind of a longer story, but many, many years ago was a volunteer firefighter. Began my career as a college student in biology and secondary education, and then became enrolled at Oklahoma State University's School of Fire Protection. Was hired as a fire protection consultant with Wausau Insurance Companies in 1994, and then with the Department of Justice in January of 2000 as a special agent.
And I see a badge there. Are you a law enforcement officer?
I am, sir.
And tell me a little bit about your training or your education in the area of investigating fires or arson.
Certainly. So initially it was with the Wisconsin Law Enforcement Academy, did my 420 or so hours there, and then took various courses prior to that while I was employed with Wausau Insurance and while I was in college in fire investigation with the International Association of Arson Investigators, the Oklahoma chapter of the International Association of Arson Investigators, and then here in Wisconsin. In addition to that, I've taken fire academy courses in fire investigation, various courses in fire death investigation, and I currently teach for the Wisconsin Department of Justice Death Investigation School. I teach fire death investigation and body recovery.
Tell us about the subspecialty of fire death investigations.
So with fire death investigation, my background there is assessing fire scenes. We generally look at fire patterns on walls and on floors and ceilings and things of that nature. When we specifically are dealing with a fire death related event, we're looking for those same types of patterns and making various assessments about things that we see with bodies. Sometimes it's a complete intact body. Sometimes it's a body that's been disarticulated as a result of the fire or fire suppression operations.
What effect does fire have on the human body?
It can change it dramatically. Heat, when heat is applied to a body, heat will generally cause the skin to tighten and shrink, wrinkles around the corners of the eyes and the corner of the mouth began to smooth out somewhat with just the application of heat. But as the body continues to heat within a compartment or a bedroom or wherever it might be, those changes eventually will get down to the destruction of the skin, the fat, the muscle tissue, and can ultimately, if the fire is allowed to continue to burn, down to the destruction of the bone tissue as well.
Sure. You talked a little bit about your experience, your education, and maybe your teaching. As well as teaching, are you one of the people who actually responds to crime scenes?
Yes, sir.
What type of crime scenes are you responding to regularly?
They vary. In addition to the fire-related events that I get called to as an employee of the Department of Justice, my coworkers in the Arson Bureau generally get called out to work officer-involved shootings, homicides that our special assignments folks investigate, and we assist in processing those scenes, sometimes with and sometimes without the assistance of the State Crime Laboratory.
Do you have any estimate as to how many fire scenes you've investigated as in your role in the Department of Justice?
Since January of 2000, if I estimated about 25 per year, over 400 or more as a case agent and additional as an assisting agent with one of the other folks in the Arson Bureau.
And as part of that experience, have you unfortunately had to see the human body in various states of being burned on different occasions?
Yes, sir.
Sometimes partially and sometimes more completely.
That's correct.
Talk to us generally about fire. What temperature does fire generally burn at? What can you tell us about fire?
Most any fire that you experience generally does not burn beyond about the temperature of around 1,800 degrees.
Sure. Is 1,800 degrees what generally fire burns at? Is that sufficient to incinerate completely the human body into ash?
It generally would not.
Tell me about that.
Generally, you end up needing some additional, if I can use the word assistance, to result in the destruction of human tissue. Even devices that are designed in crematoriums to completely destroy a body often will leave various small fragments of bone, not very often tissue, but small fragments of bone that are left over after that cremation event. So short of adding additional oxygen or maybe changing the fuel to oxygen ratio and how the fire burns, it's very, very difficult to get a complete consumption of human body just from the fire.
When you say insert oxygen, would a small household fan, I suppose there's one sitting right there, something of that size be enough to do what you just mentioned in terms of inserting oxygen if that were applied to a perhaps just a residential fire?
It would certainly help. I mean, if by example, if you're lighting a small campfire or something of that nature, or lighting a fire in your own fireplace, you may often, blow on that or or you use a set of bellows or maybe wave your hand to add and move additional air or oxygen across the surface of that fire to increase the effectiveness of that fire.
Sure. In crime scenes you've responded to and in your training and experience where the human body has been burned, are there usually some remains left that you're able to identify or find?
Generally, yes.
And in perhaps the more extreme of those states, what are those remains? What's usually left?
You'll find very small pieces of bone fragment, the more thick or dense pieces of the human skeleton, perhaps kneecaps, the ball joints of hips and shoulders, where the bone is more densely compacted because of just its development. Teeth will oftentimes remain, thicker portions, maybe around the orbits of the eye, maybe portions of the base of the skull.
Are you assisted in your work with the Department of Justice with professionals in other disciplines?
Yes, sir.
And just in general, what professions do you generally work with?
We work with medical examiners, forensic pathologists, and forensic anthropologists on a fairly regular basis when we're dealing with burned and scattered or disarticulated human remains.
In the early part of July or going into mid-July of 2021, were you asked to assist in the investigation of the homicides of Bart and Krista Halderson out in Windsor?
Yes, I was.
And how did your involvement come to be in that investigation?
Dane County Deputy Greg Leatherberry had contacted another one of my coworkers with the U.S. Department of Justice, Special Agent William Fulton, to assist in coming to look at the residence in Windsor, and specifically at that time it was directed toward looking at a fireplace that was inside the residence. After they had assessed it, I was on vacation back in Pennsylvania at the time. I was contacted and asked if upon my return to Wisconsin if I could stop by and also take a look at and assess the fireplace inside the residence.
And did you stop by?
I did, sir.
And did you have an opportunity to thoroughly examine the fireplace, the logs, the newspaper, the ashes, and things of that sort at that fireplace at the Halderson home?
Yes, sir.
All right. And were you aware that photographs were being taken throughout these processes of examining the fireplace and searching the home?
Yes, I was.
I'm showing it's been marked in this case as exhibit number 316 all the way through 340. Could you just page through those? And the question at the end is, do these appear to be photographs of the Halderson fireplace home in areas that were searched by you and others in law enforcement over the course of days you were there? Are
Yes.
those photographs of such?
Yes, those are.
Okay, I'll take those back from you. I'll move 316 all the way through 340 into evidence at this time.
Any objection?
No objection.
They are received. They may be published.
And Special Agent, there's a screen in front of you that's going to come on, but Judge, I'll ask to publish those via slideshow on USB or the HDMI left. And Agent, what are we looking at there in Exhibit 228?
This is the fireplace that I was asked to come and examine.
Just based on this overall photograph, are there any observations you're able to make based on your training and experience in this area?
In looking at the fireplace insert or the wrap that's around the fireplace, there is an area at the top that is a different color. It appears as if the paint is missing in that area, and that's perhaps bare metal beneath. And it appears as if of the what should be 4 glass inserts in the fireplace, only 3 remain.
We'll go to the next photograph. What are we looking at there?
This appears to be the base of the fireplace or the hearth area with the fireplace insert and the base of the fireplace at the top of the photograph. There are also what appear to be 3 evidence markers placed on the hearth as well.
Around the time that you were there and at other times you were where Deputy Leatherberry was taking swabs and things of that sort around the fireplace?
That's correct.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide. What are we looking at there?
That appears to be a pair of gloves.
All right, and that's Exhibit 229. I'll say it's Exhibit 229.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
We'll go to the next one.
Okay.
Tell us about that view.
That again is the front or the facing side of the fireplace with the 3 of 4 panels of glass still in place. It appears in this photograph you can still see portions of the glass at both the top and the bottom of the door frame on the left-hand side.
Okay. Go to the next slide, 231. Is that a closer-up view of that area that you were saying you could see the bare metal?
That is correct.
What does this appear to be to you based on your training and experience? What were you observing there?
In looking at this photograph, there are a couple of things. One, if we look toward the middle portion of the photograph on the stone, there is some soot deposition or discoloration to the stone, which would not be uncommon in the area of a wood-burning fireplace inside a home. Beneath that is the insert for the fireplace, and toward the, if you were looking at the top edge, toward the left and the right-hand side, there appears to be a bubbling or some type of change in the texture of the paint on both sides, and in the middle portion, the paint appears to be absent down to the level of the bare metal.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide. 232, what did 232 appear to be to you?
232 appears to be the far right-hand pane of the glass doors to the fireplace.
We'll go to the next slide. 233, is it closer up of that glass area that you said was broken off?
That's correct, down toward the bottom left door, yes.
We'll go to the next slide, which is 234. And is that door open?
That's correct.
All right, we'll go to the next slide. 235. At some point, you opened up the fireplace, correct?
That's correct.
What types of observations did you personally make based on your training experience once you were able to open up the fireplace and look inside?
Certainly, just a couple of items in looking around. If we've moved beyond the observations of the fireplace insert with the discoloration and the change in texture of the paint, as we look inside the fireplace, there are a few areas of discoloration on both the left, rear, and right-hand sides of the stonework inside the fireplace. There is a discoloration or a change in coloration, if you will, on the fireplace grate from left to right. And as we got in a little bit further and began to examine things a little more closely, there was almost like a greasy residue on the pull chain on the right-hand side, which controls the fireplace damper at the top of the chimney.
In your profession, why was discoloration noticeable, or why did you even note it in any of your reports?
Certainly, there is when we look at fire scenes in general, we're looking for changes in things from in patterns. If we're looking at the overall a particular piece of fuel, let's say, like a couch, we're looking at differences across the surfaces of that couch, considering it's the same piece of fuel from left to right, top to bottom. We're looking at how it burns differently and what it may do differently in the environment. In looking at this photograph of the fireplace grate in particular, we noticed the color change and the gradation between left and right. To me, that indicated that something toward the right-hand side of the fireplace burned differently, was perhaps a different fuel than what was on the opposing side.
All right, and we'll go to the next slide. 236, just a view of that glass again.
That's correct.
All right, next slide, 237. What are we looking at there, and why was that notable?
At the bottom of the fireplace, or the fireplace floor, and what you would find in most solid fuel burning fireplaces or furnaces, you would find a trap door, if you will, or an ash dump door. It's a flat metal door that rotates on a central pin left or right, and in a fireplace that burns wood, to get rid of the ash, you would, to keep your fireplace clean, you would open that up, sweep the ash down in, and it would go into some type of container or area where the ash would be secured until you cleaned it out.
Sure. Is this a common feature in homes?
Yes. In wood-burning fireplaces, yes.
Okay. And the area in which this goes into, is that generally a fire-resistant area?
Generally, it could go into an ash bucket. I can tell you from personal experience growing up, it went to another unused fireplace in the basement of my parents' home. And it just went to the floor in the basement and there was nothing there to catch it. In some locations, it's an enclosed environment. In other locations, it might go into a metal ash bin or bucket where the ash would be collected and removed.
In the times that it's an enclosed environment and not just a bucket or another fireplace below it, is there usually an access door to allow the homeowner or whoever's keeping the fire to be able to clean that out periodically?
Yes, there should be.
Okay. We'll go to the next slide. 238. What are we looking at there, and why was that notable?
This is the right side, lower right-hand side of the fireplace. And again, I believe when Detective Leatherberry took this photograph, it was to document that discoloration of the tines, if you will, on the fireplace grate, as well as the presence of the greasier substance that's on the handle for the pull chain on the right-hand side.
Sure. And this may be a good time to ask this question. Some of these photographs are being taken by others, but were you personally involved in being very close to this area and this fireplace?
Yes, I was.
Was there any sort of scent that made that gave you any impression or that raised your attention at all?
Yes, there was.
And tell me about that.
When I'll talk about by example first, because it'll be somewhat maybe gruesome toward the end. When in the performance of my normal duties, if we are out conducting a fire death investigation and we're looking to recover human remains inside a structure that may be buried beneath debris, that may be in collapse, whatever it might be, we rely very much on our senses sometimes to get us there. Sometimes it's a sense of sight. Sometimes it is feel. You can sometimes walk over top of human remains that are beneath ash and not know it until you feel a difference in what you're standing on. And sometimes it is smell. And I equate that smell very often because I love to barbecue. It smells like barbecued pork oftentimes, or the grease that you would get from barbecuing a pork shoulder. And this is the smell that I associated with what I was gathering from inside that fireplace when I was down in front of it and working near it.
We'll go to the next slide. Now we're back up on the actual frame itself, but I think it's a closer view in Exhibit 241. Can you tell us why this photograph's relevant and what you're able to glean from that bubbling that we see there?
Certainly. This appears to me to be, if we look at the doors and the break in the seam of the doors, this is probably where the two doors come together in the middle of the fireplace. And what you're seeing on the metallic surface above of the insert is a bubbling or a change in the texture of the paint that is applied, presumably from the manufacturer, but the paint that's applied around the frame of the fireplace.
And based on your training and experience, do you have any comment as to what might cause such bubbling?
Certainly, around a fireplace, the assessment that I think most people would make if they looked at it was that it must have been impacted thermally by some type of heat leaving the fireplace and impacting the metal. Could that also be caused by some type of chemical contact? Absolutely.
We'll go to the next slide. 242. Now, this is the other side of perhaps that area on the top of the frame. What different are you able to glean from this picture? It's labeled as 242, but also with Mr. Leatherberry's sticker as Family L.
Certainly. As we are on the left side of the photo, the far left side of the photo where the two corners of the insert come together, there is no, at least in this photograph, no visible damage or changes in the surface of the paint around the insert. But as we move to the right, you're right also, we start to see that the texture of the paint changes and the amount of the paint present continues to change until we're at the far right-hand side of the photograph where we're down to the bare metallic surface of the frame insert.
Okay. And same question here. Do you believe this either could have been affected by heat or some sort of chemical agent?
I would believe that this would be a heat or a thermal-related artifact.
Sure. Now we'll go to the next slide, which is Exhibit 316. At some point, that fireplace grate was removed out.
That's correct.
And you examined it thoroughly, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay. Is this that grate?
That is the grate.
That newspaper that we see crumpled up in there, was it important to you to maybe look into the date on that newspaper and what type of newspaper it was?
Yes, we did. We examined each of the pieces of each of the items that were on the grate as we went from top to bottom and got down to where the newspaper was.
And you wrote a report in this matter documenting the type of newspaper, where it was addressed to, and the date and all of that?
That's correct.
And if you need to see that report, you let me know and I'll just bring it to you. But do you recall the date that newspaper was from?
Well, I don't want to speculate, but late June of 2021, maybe the 23rd, maybe the 27th.
Sure. And if I showed you your report, you'd be able to confirm that?
Absolutely, I would.
All right. Showing your report in this matter and My thumb is right next to it. Were you right on the 23rd?
I was right on the 23rd.
All right. And what was that addressed to?
It was listed as current resident 4595 Oak Spring Circle, DeForest, Wisconsin, 53532-1743.
And what newspaper was it?
This was the Badgerland Values Dane Zone newspaper.
And that's one of those things they just send to your house. You don't really want them, but they send them to you anyway?
That's correct.
Okay. We'll go to the next slide. 317, is that an overhead view?
Yes, it is.
There's a white area in the middle of that burnt log. Did that at all catch your attention?
Yes, it did.
Why?
When for orientation purposes, I guess for the jury, when you're looking at this photograph, the top left-hand portion of the photograph with the darker tines, as you're facing the fireplace, that would be on your right-hand side. So the back of that fireplace grate is at the bottom of the screen for orientation purposes. But in looking at the burned piece of wood in the center and the white item that is present there at about the 6 o'clock position, before we moved this out of the fireplace, we took a look at it with some better lighting, and based on my training experience, that appeared to be bone, burned bone.
And was that in fact there? You did not place that there, I guess I'll ask.
That is correct. I did not place that there.
And we'll go to the next slide, which I believe is a close-up 318, but that is a photograph prior to anything being disturbed in that area.
That's correct.
Okay. We'll go to 319, which is next. That's what the fireplace looks like without the grate,
That is correct.
and we're able to see a more clear view of the ash trap there.
Yes.
I don't know where everyone's at with fireplaces in their house. A lot of people have the gas one. Could you just explain what that chain does in relation to a fire?
Certainly. So the chain it controls a damper that is on top of the chimney. If you were to go on top of the roof of the residence to where the chimney is, there is a metal plate that is able to be moved up and down by pulling on this chain, either down or releasing it up, to assist in airflow throughout the chimney, as is the circular item that you see in the back. That is for combustion air or fresh air to come into the back of the fire at the base of the fire from the exterior, and the heat rises and goes out and leaves the structure. So if that chain were pulled completely down, it would close the damper at the top of the fireplace.
Understood. All right, we'll go to the next exhibit, 320, and just a closer view of maybe that ash trap. We'll go to the next one, 321. Again, that became relevant in your investigation, did it not?
That's correct.
That's perhaps why there's quite a few photos. And we'll go through a few of these somewhat quickly, but we'll go to the next one. There, we're looking at just another view of that top view of the fire.
That's correct.
Goes without saying, but fair to say that that fire appears to have some fresh logs put on top of it
Yes,
and one burnt piece in the middle.
that's correct.
All right, we'll go to the next one.
Counsel, we should note for the record what the exhibit numbers are.
Sure. That was 322. Now we're at 323. What are you doing here in taking having some of these photographs taken? Do you know the purpose?
Yes, I believe when we took this it was twofold. One, to continue to show the pieces or the items that were on the grate that were unburned, to include the two logs on both the left and the right side, as well as the newspaper. And in the bottom center, running parallel with the fireplace grate, was another piece of wood that ultimately was squared off on one end and kind of rounded over on the end closest to the viewer.
All right, we'll go to the next one, which is 324. We're going to have a couple close-up photographs of this suspected bone, correct?
Yes,
And this was the bone that you observed on the top of the fireplace?
that's
Fire?
correct. Yes,
All right, we'll go to the next one, 325. Just some different lighting.
yes,
Go to the next one, 326. And at some point, it was placed on a kind of a measuring tool from law enforcement.
yes,
And the same with 327.
correct.
At points during your investigation, did it appear necessary to you to call out a forensic anthropologist who specialized in bone?
Absolutely.
And was one brought to the scene, in fact, a doctor?
Yes.
And who was that doctor?
Dr. Christina Figueroa Soto for the Dane County Medical Examiner's Office.
We'll go to the next one, 328. What is this?
Those are additional, what appeared to be bone fragments that were around the area where the larger piece was that you saw in the prior exhibit.
Okay. 329. Just another one of those fragments.
That's correct.
And the next couple, we'll go to 330. There was just some zoomed in images of that grate where some of these things were being found, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Same with 331,
Yes.
332,
Yes.
and 333. 333, though, brings us to a different spot in the Halderson home, does it not?
That's correct.
And in fact, we'll go to 334. We have to go to the basement, right?
Yes, the prior photo was the ash dump removed so we could see what was underneath it and what was beneath it.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Sure.
Fireplace. Where, in fact, did that ash trap lead to in the Halderson home?
It led to an area directly beneath the fireplace. This was a tri-level home. The basement level is below grade. The area where the fireplace was located that you saw in the prior photos was at grade level. There was a kitchen, living room, dining room space, and then a bedroom space. So we're in this photograph, we're at the lowest level of the home, looking at what would have been the back side of the fireplace. And I had mentioned on one of the prior exhibits, the combustion intake, the circular item in the back of the fireplace. The metallic pipe that you see here is what goes directly to the back side of that combustion air intake for the fireplace.
Was there an access in the Halderson home to the container containing the ashes from the ash trap?
Yes, there was.
And was it easily accessible?
No, it was not.
What do you mean by that?
What you see here is after some of the items had already been moved, but so in the basement, the blue table that you see here was covered in other items. I believe I referred to it in my report. There were pieces and parts of what appeared to be an old billiard table that had been stacked up upon the top surface and leaning up against the front of this blue workbench, if you will. The workbench and all the items associated with the billiard table had to be removed, and we then removed the wood paneling that you see on the wall to get to where the ash trap is. And if you look at the bottom right-hand portion of the photo, underneath the table, you'll see a gray colored item there. Immediately to the left of that, that debris that you see on the floor is debris that has fallen out of the door that covered up the ash trap access to the fireplace.
So what did you do to gain access to this area of the house?
All the items were removed from the workbench. The workbench was removed, and we removed the paneling from the wall. Saw that we had a very, very small opening for access to the ash trap. And knowing that we had to get in here to see what was beneath that fireplace, my coworker, William Fulton from Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms had contacted a colleague of his who specializes in urban search and rescue, shoring up buildings, breaching walls and things like that to find out what was going to be the safest way to access this for our safety and to prevent any collapse inside the residence.
Okay. And we'll go to the next slide. So what did you do here?
So so for reference, the smallest opening that you see there on the right-hand side where the wall is painted yellow, that was where the ash trap door had been. And it was a very, very small, approximately 8x8 opening that we needed. That's all we had initially to try to get inside of where this was. So the larger openings that you see to the left and the right were openings made in the wall by Special Agent Fulton based on the recommendation from his urban search and rescue coworker.
Okay. We'll go to the next slide. just a closer up of what is that?
That is the opening to the left-hand side that we created in the wall with the sledgehammer to be able to access the interior portion that was beneath the fireplace.
And we'll go to the next slide, closer up. What is that?
That is a similar opening, but now on the right-hand side of the fireplace.
Okay. At that point, after cutting these holes, were you able to access the ash area?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll go to the next slide. What is that?
That is a top-down view from the vantage point of the level just above the basement, looking down through the ash trap into the pit that contained the ashes underneath the fireplace.
All right. And we'll go to the next slide. What is that?
That is a similar view of that area and the ash that was inside the ash pit, if you will, beneath the fireplace.
And the next slide, similar?
Similar, yes, with debris removed.
All right. And the next slide. What are we looking at there?
Same area, a different capture of the area after additional debris was removed from inside.
Okay. We're going to stop looking at photographs for a second. You mentioned debris removed. So I guess I assume you're removing debris and taking photos along the way?
That's correct.
Tell me about that process.
So I'll talk about the photos first. With the assistance of Dane County Deputy Scott Coons, we attached cameras to the underside of the fireplace. The support floor for the fireplace had iron or steel bars running through it for support. We used magnetic cameras to hold, or magnets to hold the cameras up so that we could view the interior of this to do two things: to A, take photographs along the way, and B, to push those images to his iPad that he had, so that in areas, I mean, these holes are about 16 by 16 inches. And I'm a little barrel-chested, and getting inside was a little difficult. So sometimes seeing, we had to rely on what he was transmitting to his iPad so that we could see where we were to gather items. So we had lights that he set up inside, as well as his cameras that assisted us in documenting the process as we removed debris from the upper levels down to the level that you see here.
And just in general, how did you remove the debris?
So we worked in at different times from each side, but never usually at the same time. We had a fan that was set up on top of the chimney. We removed the damper from the top of the chimney outside and had a fan to draw out dust, to keep dust from getting inside the residence. And we used large grain scoops, plastic handled grain scoops, and removed the items removed the piles of debris in there to 5-gallon pails, and had those then removed to the exterior of the structure for further examination by Dr. Figueroa Soto and others, as well as the Dane County Bomb Squad with their x-ray machine.
And how long did this whole process take to take out all this ash?
We worked that day for probably 6 hours or so. From the time we got started, we had breached the wall prior to that, and we had several different crews there, sifting crews working outside, as well as the crime lab and the Dane County Bomb Squad. And it was the better portion of a day. We actually, 3 or 4 of us actually ended up having to leave at the end of the day to go to a different fire someplace else, but we finished this up before we took off that day.
Sure. And were you part of the sifting operation after the debris was removed?
A portion of it, yes.
And were things of note being found?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
So the sifting operation consisted of a couple of different things. Again, when materials would be brought out before they went to the sifting stations, and we probably had 4 to 6 sifting stations, maybe more. Before those items were sifted, they were x-rayed by the bomb squad, bomb techs, to determine if there were any items in a particular bucket that might be of interest and that somebody should be looking for, whether it was metallic items, whether they believed it was something that showed up that maybe looked different that you might not see right away with the naked eye. And then those items were sifted. As the items were sifted, if there were questions about what it might be, whether it was bone or whether it was maybe non-organic remains, Dr. Figueroa Soto was there to answer those questions for the sifting crews. And then as we went through 1/2-inch and 1/4-inch screens, the items that were sifted out onto tarps in case we needed to go back through those at a later date, and those items were maintained.
Sure. Did you yourself see any items that appeared to be bone to you?
Yes, I did.
And were those items also examined by Dr. Figueroa Soto from the crime lab, or from the medical examiner's office?
Yes. Yes, they were.
Those items that you observed that appeared to be bone, as well as the items that you observed in the fireplace that you've already said you believe to be bone, were those consistent with what you've observed in your career and your training and experience as bone or human bone that's subjected to heat or fire?
I could say that they were consistent with bone. I would not be able to make a determination while there if it was human bone or non-human bone.
Do you rely on another expert to make that
I do
determination?
indeed.
And who is that expert?
That would be a forensic anthropologist, and in this case, Dr. Figueroa Soto.
And she was in fact on scene, was she not?
She was.
1 second.
You bet.
Examination.
No, thank you.
May this witness be excused
He may be excused, yes.
and released, or you'll let him know?
We'll let him know.
All right. Thank you very much. sir.
Thank you.
Have a good remainder of your day.
You do
Thank
the same. Thank you.
Let me inquire, counsel, of the timing here, if you can.
Sure.
Come on up. Another hearing. What I'd like to do is go back onto the record at 12:45, so that there's an hour and 15 minutes here where you are free. We need some time ourselves. I do as well. So we'll come back at 12:45. And I remind you again, while you're away from this room, don't discuss the case with anyone or overhear any discussions. Don't seek out information or become exposed to any information about the case or take any steps purposely or inadvertently that could expose you to information. We'll see you after the lunch break. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Langer. I am the digital content manager for channel3000.com. As you mentioned, they're just going to take their lunch break here for the day in day 6 of the Chandler Halderson trial. They'll be back at about 12:45 Central Time here in Madison, 12:45 Central Time. In the meantime, I'm going to hop on here and kind of recap everything that we've heard in the morning session. We got started just at about 8:45 this morning, so if you missed anything, we'll just kind of recap it here before going into that lunch break. So first thing we heard from this morning was actually testimony from a couple of neighbors in the Halderson neighborhood. One neighbor who lives across the street, he's a retired detective actually, he reported smelling something like a fire or something like that on the evening of July 1st while he was kind of working outside. Thought it was a little odd because it's as others have said, it was early July. It was very hot in Wisconsin at that time, but he reported smelling the strong odor of burning wood. Before that smell eventually turned into what he called a pungent smell. He kind of likened it to like a pork roast or something like that. That's what he smelled that night, and holiday weekend, it may not have seemed out of place at the time, but it was so strong that he remembered it. It was actually so strong that he kind of walked around, tried to figure out where in the neighborhood that smell was actually coming from. We heard from a second neighbor who actually lives on the opposite side of the Halderson home. So living behind the Halderson home, they share a pond in the yard there. And that home actually had security cameras installed pointing back towards the Halderson home. And when investigators looked at that video, they found what they described as a flickering light in the Halderson home in the early morning hours of July 2nd. So from that July 1st evening into the early morning hours of July 2nd. And what prosecutors did is basically then they brought in a member of the Dane County Sheriff's Office who's an expert in video analysis and that kind of thing, and they played the entire video. Sped up at some times, but what they saw was a flickering light in the Halderson residence from about 12:18 in the morning or so, right up until the sun came up, basically just after 4:30 in the morning that summer. So for 3 or 4 hours there, they had this flickering light in the window of the Halderson home. What the sheriff's office also did with his deputy Scott Coons, he conducted an experiment basically where they tried to determine exactly where in the home that light came from, which they thought it was fire, but they needed to make sure as part of the investigation. So what he had another deputy do is basically go room to room to all the other windows that were facing the security camera, and he had them wave basically a flashlight or a wand or something to kind of replicate that sort of flashing lights that they had seen on the security video. And they had that deputy go from room to room, and they were able to determine scientifically that that light had come from the window in front of the family room where the fireplace was in that home. As we learned yesterday and heard more about today, that's also where they found bone fragments inside that fireplace when they looked closely at it. So we saw all that video, we saw the several hours of that flame going, and we heard from the neighbors who, as I had mentioned, testified that they thought they smelled pork burning in the air. The next witness that we heard from is actually Special Agent William Boswell. He's from the State Department of Justice, works on the arson unit and that kind of thing. Very much so well-versed in what a fire can do to a human body, because that's what he investigates pretty frequently. So he testified that, from his experience too, and as a guy, he says, who likes to barbecue, he knows that the smell of burnt human flesh, both while it's happening and after, does in fact smell sort of similar to pork. And he testified that when he was called in to take a closer look at this fireplace, that's the smell that he smelled inside that fireplace. They also found some grease inside that fireplace on the pull chain there. They found the bone fragments, as we talked about, also some discoloration and that kind of thing that they testified on, just what it would take to burn a human body. And as he testified, most fire burns up to 1,800 degrees, but even that is not enough to get rid of an entire human body, especially those denser bone pieces of bone in the human body, as he mentioned, like shoulder blades, kneecaps, that kind of thing. Even crematoriums, he said, will usually have some sort of bone fragments left behind. So as we listen to the testimony here then too, they went through all the photos of that fireplace. They removed that grate out, took a closer look at it. They looked at the date on the newspaper that was in there too, which came up as June 23rd of 2021. So about a little more than a week before this fire was believed to have happened is when that newspaper was dated. So we also saw the photos of basically the ash chute. So there's an ash dump at the bottom of that fireplace, led to an area down below the basement, and investigators basically tore that up too. It took in all that ash and debris and stuff that was left from the fireplace and started sifting through it. And as we heard, they did find more bone fragments in that as well. So that's kind of where we stand so far in day 6 of the Chandler Halderson trial. A lot of the testimony, of course, as we heard, just focused on that fireplace, a key part of the Halderson home. We heard in opening statements that's where prosecutors believe that Chandler Halderson would have tried to get rid of many of the remains of Bart and Krista Halderson. We don't know yet who those bone fragments belong to, but we also then, of course, know that other pieces of their remains were found pretty much scattered across Dane County. So if he did try to burn their remains, he didn't burn all of them in that fireplace. So that's sort of where they took a break right now. They had to make sure that they were out in the next few minutes here just because the judge had another thing on his schedule to take care of, and they wanted to kind of align that up with the lunch break. So gave the jurors a bit more of a lunch break. As I said at the top here, 12:45 p.m. Central Time is the time that they anticipate coming back. So we'll log off here for that time. In the meantime, as I've been saying all along, we do all these recaps and we type up everything I say here basically and put it on channel3000.com. So if you miss any part of this trial at all and you want to catch up, just go to channel3000.com. You'll see that banner at the top of our homepage there for the Halderson trial. Click on that, bookmark it, and you'll have basically all of these recaps from every day of the trial, all of our coverage dating back to last July on this case. This live stream will be here too. So channel3000.com. That link is also in the description of these live streams as well. Just click that, easy to get to, and kind of fill yourself in if you missed any part of this. With that said, we will kind of sign off here for the lunch hour, and we will be back just before the jury comes back in for the second half of today's testimony. Thanks for watching, everyone, and we will see you later.